Welcome to the DAAN November meeting. It's like happy dashboard release. It's been a busy week. Hopefully everybody's going to make it all the way to Thanksgiving. I know I'm looking forward to it. We'll get started in just a minute. I think a couple more people are pouring in here. Let me see if I can. Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome again to the DAAN November meeting. I am Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for accountability and data literacy. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Hillary Weissman up here at the front, and scattered throughout the room, the rest of my team. I've got Karina Nahara and Roy Lung. And we also are joined by our good friends from the assessment unit, Stephen Bartlett and Sarah Nitsos. They'll be up here in a little bit giving the latest updates around assessment, and there are a lot of those. Just some housekeeping, sorry. First thing, if you're in the room today, if there is an emergency, and there are no planned drills today, if there is an emergency, we will all evacuate to space 23, which is out back where you came from. And we used to say that kind of jokingly and cynically, but we actually did have an earthquake one time in the middle of a meeting, so we were humbled and we knew that that was clearly a sign from somewhere else. So anyway, as far as the hybrid meeting goes, for those of you who are online, please mute your microphone. We just make sure you're muted. Sometimes it accidentally comes off in the room. It can be kind of distracting. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. We will try to respond in real time, and if we can't answer it in real time, we'll definitely make sure to loop back around in our follow-up Q&A and make sure everybody's questions are answered. Especially helpful if they're in the chat, because we'll expand somewhat when we do the follow-up Q&A to give you the links and things that will make it even a little more concrete for you. And if you're in the room, make sure you just raise your hand and give us time to get a microphone over to you so everybody online can hear your question. So just as far as what DAAN is and what our commitment is, we are the Data Assessment and Accountability Network for Los Angeles County. It's interesting. I've got one colleague in the room here who I've known for 10 years, like as we met through here. And so that's how powerful it is to, I think, go through this process. But our purpose here is just regular purposeful communication. So everybody has the latest details from the state. We come in with an inquiry-based culture when we look at data, we look at everything, because we think it's really valuable for you to go back and have the same mindset, when you're taking a look at your data or asking those questions that come up in your roles. We have a think tank mindset. We love to crowdsource any kind of problems that come up, and we do believe in trust and systems-focused thinking. We are responsive and supportive to your needs, so we definitely encourage you to reach out outside of these meetings. We love to be able to support you and then share whatever. If you're having a problem, somebody else is probably having the same problem. So we love to make those kind of the source of a lot of our presentations. And we do have a shared responsibility to one another. So you may find that you're having a challenge. Reach out to us. We'll connect you with other people within the network, because that's the real value of having this network. And we are kind of a unique role. Most of us serve in kind of a unique role within our LEAs. And sometimes you can feel awful lonely. So we like to connect you with one another. For today, your materials, I think Karina has probably dropped them in the chat already, but we do have everything up on Canvas. And if there's anything we didn't put up for some reason, we'll make sure we add it. You can just bring it to our attention. But we like to put everything up there for just kind of a standing archive of resources and materials that you can drop back and find if you need them. And just as a little out of date here, the information in this slide, it's current as of actually November 17th, I believe. So actually November 18th. So nothing is as old as September 29th. That would be pretty scary. And we will follow up, like I say, in a follow-up Q&A that we send out just via our DAAN digest, usually about a week after. So you have a little bit of time to digest and get to it. So we have a few meetings left. We have today's meeting, then we won't meet again till January. By then we'll have, I think the growth data will be out. That'll be another thing to look at on the dashboard. There may be some other things, and I'm sure that we'll be getting really busy because that's right before we start the LPAC window, so there'll be lots of assessment questions we want to answer. And then we have 2 more meetings following that, so we'll run you through the whole year. So a little quick check-in with you, and if you're in the virtual world, please feel free to use the chat on this one. But the dashboard comes out. We're like all focused on the dashboard. It may cause a lot of hand wringing, but just a question. What other dashboards do you check regularly? Are you like constantly checking your stock portfolio, or like this week, are you looking at the weather, thinking, are my plans going to get ruined this weekend? For me, I'm like, what hour can I walk the dog that he won't get totally soaked? Like, is there a window in there? Are you like me with your fitness tracker and constantly? So turn to your elbow partner and just talk. What dashboards do you check regularly? And then what emotions come up when you're checking those dashboards? I know for me, I look at my sleep monitor, and I think, yep, that's about right. I did not sleep well last night, and that's about it. That's the extent of what I could do. So take a minute, talk to an elbow partner, and drop in the chat what you check. So what do we have in the chat, Hillary?
Well, you can tell that we're Southern California because quite a few people are checking the weather app. We also have some people who are checking their travel budget, and a few people who are checking the schedules for sports and standings and see where their kids are at and where they're going. Someone says that they're checking their cyber chip in their new knee. Sorry, that was Mr. Fisher there. There's a chip in his knee. He's checking that. People are looking at basketball and football stats, and of course, Fitbit data.
All right. Yeah, I didn't check this week. I know we have some Trojan fans in the room. Where are we ranked now? Do we know? Anyway, David? I mean, come on. That was a nice victory over Ireland. I think that warrants a little bump in the standings, right? All right. Well, thank you for indulging. Anything in the room that was interesting or novel to you as far as what people are checking? Kind of the standard. Okay. Yeah.
On ways.
Oh, yeah. Checking Waze the night before. I do that frequently too. Get an estimate of how long it'll take me. That's definitely, that's life in Southern California for sure. Yeah, so, and we say this knowing that the dashboard coming out, it may have caused quite a bit of excitement. It might have been consternation. It might have been surprise. Who knows? There's always something. So we're going to talk a little bit about the dashboard public release and some of the pieces that are out there. That's going to be in our accountability updates. We're also going to cover CalPads. Maybe turn that mic off. Sorry, we're getting feedback in the room. Do some CalPads, brief CalPads data updates. Professional learning opportunities related to accountability and some other things. Then our assessment team will join us after a short break, and we'll cover lots of assessment updates, some of their professional learning. And then for those folks who are in the room, we have an extension activity that I'm calling Adventures in Communicating Your CASP and Dashboard Results. And we have some real scenarios that have occurred in the last month or so, what districts have had to kind of grapple with, that we hopefully you'll have some of your own stories to share with one another, but also some of the real challenges that people have been faced with communicating their own data and their own results. And we want to get, just brainstorm on how best to tackle these, what maybe your approach would be, and what strategies you might recommend. So we'll get right into the accountability update. So yes, last Thursday, we got the release of the 2025 dashboard. It was really exciting. We were away at a meeting, and it was like trying to get on and simultaneously, because we were rapidly trying to validate all of our questions we had around differentiated assistance, eligibility, and whatnot. So, trying to scramble. And of course, every time they release the dashboard, even during the preview, you get so many people trying to log in that it stalls out. But eventually you get on, and hopefully you've had a chance to kind of digest all the data. What was released, which is actually a little unique this year, I think, because in the past we've had to wait for some of these pieces. But along with the dashboard itself, you had the release of the additional reports page, and that's where a lot of the juicy stuff is. The dashboard itself is really great for like parents and other community members, but when you get into want to really look at data, drilling down into the 5x5s is important, and we've did a lot of work the other day. We had a workshop working with a bunch of site level leaders, and we found that they really had an interest in understanding how the 5x5 work, because it really can help them with goal setting for their SIPs and whatnot. So we did a lot of work. So you may want to take a look at your 5x5s as well. And this year you do have the science 5x5, right? So we have that. They had that, even though it has no accountability implications. It's actually kind of interesting to look at first if you're a district level where your schools all fell, and then where your individual student groups fell. So that's up there. Also, what's kind of unique this year, you've got the student group report, of course, the CASP, LPAC, and science participation report. And so I would definitely take a look at the science participation report. I just looked at a few last night, and it's like that might be an area, we know it's a challenge to get everybody tested. So you may want to, if you're the assessment administrator, start with that. You probably have a sense of what it is, but now that it's gone through all the validations and the accountability folks have removed folks who weren't required to test or whatnot, you can see what the actual final participation rate was for different student groups, and that might be a goal setting for next year. Make sure everybody's tested, and also to see what kind of impact it might have had on your outcome, on your results. You also there's a graduation rate additional report that has a lot of detail. You can see your 4th and your 5th year, so it gives you a little more insight into the overall graduation rate, how successful you're being with those 5th year. And then the college and career measures report is already out. In the past, that's actually taken a little bit of time to come out, but that came right out. And one of the things that I looked at right away, and I highly recommend if you're a high school level LEA, look at your AP results if students prepared by AP. They changed, as you recall, they changed the rule this year to include the students who completed an AP course with a C- or better, in addition to students who completed, they had 2 of those, who completed 2 AP exams with a 3 or higher. And I saw a huge bump in the districts I was looking at for AP as the way that the students were prepared. So that may have had a good positive impact for a lot of our LEAs. So take a look at that. What's coming forward in December is the growth data report, and that'll be mid-December. I don't think we have a hard date on it yet. It's going to have a very different appearance. The color scheme is going to be different, and that's intentional. It should appear on the front page in that information section, but it won't be as hard to find as last year where you had to really drill down. But it'll look very different because it's not being used for accountability. They didn't want people to get confused about it. It has different growth performance categories that were established earlier this year by the State Board of Education: minimal, moderate, average, accelerated, and exceptional growth. One other thing you'll notice on there, and this is just a sample, I'd be curious what this looked like, but they have this little bit extra real estate on there. And so you see on here, it says 67.8% of students improved their score from the prior year. Hopefully that would say 100%, because really that means if they were in 3rd grade to 4th grade, their scale score improved, which we would hope to see, right? So, I mean, that would be something I would dial in on when this does get published, and to see, obviously it doesn't necessarily happen. Anything could happen. The student's scale score could go the wrong direction, or they could stay flatline. But, as the students move up a grade span, you're expecting their scale score to grow. It may not grow as much as you would like it to, but anyway, so look at that. That's going to be front and foremost, and people may ask about that, what that means. There's going to be a downloadable data file this year as well. And so one of the things I would look at with this data is compare it to last year's. They are different cut scores and everything, but if you look at the overall status, we saw a lot of outstanding schools where we saw exceptional growth. And I think what we'd like to see is, was it replicated? Is that consistent from year to year? Now, it does change from year to year because they calculate it every year. So if the whole state moves up, then you're competing against that. It's not a fixed amount. So they're comparing every student's performance in the state against every other student's performance at a similar level, the expected growth based on the prior year's outcome. So it is a moving target. But if you consistently see in one of your schools that there's strong growth, exceptional growth perhaps, 2 years in a row, then you probably have something going on that's good there. So I would something to celebrate. So just some overview, some big picture. The state put out their kind of dashboard overview. And an important thing to understand is the dashboard is calculated for individual LEA, so districts and charter schools and schools. And then the state does its own calculation. So you notice you can toggle on any indicator between your district and what the state's average is. So they can do these kinds of summaries. I'm going to give you kind of a rough overview of what happened in LA County, but they don't generate a dashboard for LA County. There's no summary dashboard for LA County. So we have to infer a little bit. But what we saw at the state level was an improvement in the graduation rates, right? Up to 87.5% grad rate statewide, which is an increase of 4.5 percentage points from the first dashboard in 2017, so a steady upward climb. There are gaps narrowing in the graduation rate, so you saw increases among several student groups, including foster youth, long-term English learners, students with disabilities, African American, Pacific Islander. The college career readiness bumped up 3.1 percentage points statewide, up to 53.9%. So maybe that had something to do with the inclusion of the AP exam, AP course completion. I'm sure it had an impact. And then you also saw an increase in the number of students completing the A through G requirements, which is one of those factors. Chronic absenteeism continues to improve, but it's actually kind of slowed down a little bit. So we remember our peak in 2022 post-COVID. It's now down, hovering around 17.1%, but it has slowed. So there, especially certain student groups, we see continued problems. As you know, you're probably all well aware of it, but it's definitely an area around which we expect to see districts focusing continued attention. There's some academic achievement modest statewide. We saw in the CAS scores that came out earlier that there was a bump up. LA County, thanks to a significant part by the gains that were made in LA Unified, but LA County actually exceeded the averages on the CAS scores, not the dashboard academic, but the CAS scores, to above the average distance, or sorry, the average percent meeting exceeding is above the pre-COVID levels. And that was unique. The state's still below the pre-COVID levels. We across LA County are above the pre-COVID levels. So that was huge for LA County. So there's a lot of good work going on out there. And we will dive in more towards our dashboard data specifically to figure out what is going on there. And for the first time, the dashboard indicators for the state for the all student level are yellow or green. So there is no oranges or reds. So that was good. And then kind of what we could do, we just took a look at kind of the distribution of our all student category across all our districts. And so we did similar to what the state reported. The performance on the graduation rate remained high. So 68% of our districts, and looking at the all students category, 68% of the districts were in the high or very high status level, right? So many of those you maintain, but if you have a really high graduation rate, there's not a lot of room for growth on there. So that was great. Additionally, the college career indicator results increased significantly among 70% of the districts that have the CCI. So that's a huge percentage that are not just maintaining, but they're growing, which is, again, consistent with what we saw at the state. For all students on the academic indicators for both ELA and math, we saw 60% of the districts were in the increased category. So a lot were in the maintain category. We didn't have a lot going backwards, but we did. There are some in the maintain. That doesn't mean they didn't grow. It's just sometimes maybe it's not enough to move the needle. It's got to have a 3-point increase in the distance from standard. But we did see a lot, a majority that did increase. Then chronic absenteeism, very consistent with the state. We saw that 70% of our districts were reporting high or very high status still for all students. So not a surprise there. But 82% of districts, the change from the prior year was in the decreased or decreased significantly. So it's not as stalled out possibly as the state we're seeing statewide. So we're still making huge gains there. So congrats on that. And suspension rate, I'll go with the negative. We only had 10% of our districts where the suspension rate was in the high or very high status. Very few. We're almost all in the medium to very high, or very, very low, I should say, suspension rate category. So there's been a lot of work that's been happening around suspension rate. We don't see it crop up as much even for differentiated assistance eligibility. So that's a good thing. And the LP was maybe the one that was most mixed. It was kind of literally half and half. So 35% of our districts reported a level of decrease or decreased significantly on their LP, but 35% also increased or increased significantly. And the rest were right in the middle. They just maintained. So it's kind of like even distribution across the LP. And that's just for English learners. LTEL, not everybody has LTEL, so it's a little more convoluted there. One thing we really were pleased with was for differentiated assistance identification. And I'm sorry I'm focusing exclusively right now on just districts because we know a lot of our charter schools, our numbers went down for both eligible districts and eligible charter schools. So our district number, and you can see that top line, that purple line, has decreased from a peak in 2022 when we had 62 of our 80 districts were eligible for differentiated assistance. Of course, it was right post-COVID. Chronic absenteeism was affecting everybody. Since then, we've gone down. Now we have 37 districts eligible this year that met the criteria. And then you can see the big thing is looking at the student groups. These are some of our main student groups that over the years have been among those eligible. First, you see that big drop with our long-term English learners, right? And we remember we changed the criteria, the eligibility criteria from last year to this year. So they removed ELA and math indicators as an eligibility criteria for LTELs because it really didn't make a lot of sense. Your highest performing LTELs get pulled out of the LTEL student group. So they did maintain, though, the LP as an orange or a red being the criteria for pupil performance. And so with that, we dropped from 31 districts eligible for the long-term English learners down to just 13 eligible. And you can see also we went down with students with disabilities. That's been on a decrease. That had historically been the most identified student group around the state, but also in LA County. You'll see now it's actually down below. Foster youth shot up a little bit. This is very small, but it went from 14 to 18. But now foster youth is exceeding students with disabilities. So I think it's a great positive trend that we're seeing with students with disabilities. And our ELs, I guess that's always the group you want to celebrate. From their peak when they had 16 in 2023, just 2 years ago, just one district was eligible for the English learner student group. So, and maybe that speaks to LTELs, the significance of having LTELs as a separate student group, that maybe that, a lot of that was being driven. So that's great news, and we'll get more data out around charter schools as well. We went from having 33 eligible charter schools for differentiated assistance down to 25. And so that was good. And I think we'll get some numbers about how many there were some new districts are mostly popping back in from previous years. Oftentimes just one student group was eligible. And that's significant. I'll talk about a little bit later what the state board is talking about and the significance that may have for that kind of change. So we threw in a little, I would like to say we created this, but we just have good friends. So there's a link on the presentation. There's also a link to this in the Canvas page. But our friends at Riverside County, they just jumped on this data. They had it all set up. So as soon as the data dropped the same day as the dashboard opened, they pulled in everybody's data from the state and they created this one pager. And this is for every district and every school. So if you're at a charter school, the link will take you to a Google folder and you'll find these one pagers, and they pulled in everything. So it's a really handy tool. I know we've used our friends at San Bernardino County also have a pretty handy tool. This thing actually adds a little bit more detail. So it gives you, on one page, you can see all of your indicators in one place. You see all the student groups, so you can kind of get the big picture. Then they've also got the breakdown of priority areas across the top. So that's like sometimes confusing, right? There are two indicators, for example, for pupil engagement, both chronic absenteeism and graduation rate. So those both, when you're talking about EA, that's important to understand. There's also the inclusion of the N size so you can kind of get a sense of, well, how big was this student group? And that's not always apparent when you're looking at your dashboard. Breakdown of distance from standard. It also includes your performance level, which it's helpful to have that performance level to understand, where are we relative to the 5x5 dashboard? You have a question? Okay, no question. And then finally, they also threw in this DA eligibility, and you can see it on this slide. If you had a student group that was eligible, met the eligibility criteria, they identified that student group. So hopefully this might be a really good one-pager for you to work with staff to share out. I think it's pretty handy just for overall getting a picture. And we like to look at these types of visualizations to see what are our big trends. Do we have systems in place that we can point to and say, we started this initiative? We were talking to a team yesterday, and they were saying, we can see in our math, we started this math initiative, and it clearly has been working. Everybody was heading the same direction, right? And so you'd hope to see that kind of either an improvement or a maintained status from the prior year for a group if you had a system in place that you were addressing these needs. And so this is maybe a good way to kind of get that quick picture. Yeah, before we move on, any questions in the room or any questions online? Yeah. Here, let me run the mic over to you real quick.
You mentioned earlier about for the growth that it was going to be compared to the state of California, that it was a moving target. So, for the percent growth, which slide was that one? Sorry.
The growth
model, yeah. So does that mean like we're not, when you say like, for example, 68% of students improved, it's not from what they did last year, but it's compared to the state?
No, that'll be just for how they did relative to their own performance. So if they had a scale score improvement from one year to the next, it gets reflected there. So, but the overall calculation, how they determine whether, your school or your student groups within the school, where they were, they do then take every student and they go back and they calculate what was the student expected to grow and then what did they actually grow. And so that expected growth becomes a number. It's a very complicated formula and it takes a while to calculate it. So that's why it comes out a month later. But every year they recalculate the whole thing. So it gets released in December. So it's not used at this point in the differentiated assistance eligibility calculations. So it's largely just for informational use, but we'll talk a lot more about it at our next meeting because it is, by a lot of people's standards, the most accurate measure. But it's really kind of hard to get your head around, I think, until you really grapple with it. So a good activity to do in person. So making the plug to come in person.
And it takes so much time, Evan, to render that data because.
Why does it take so long to render it? Because first they don't get the data from ETS. The ETS folks actually do the calculation themselves, but they need to go through all these other things first before they start running that. And then it just takes a ton of computational power because they are actually taking individual students, connecting their prior year ELA and math, and saying what would be the expected performance for this student on math relative to all of their students. And then they run this huge calculation. They say, oh, this student performed better than most students who started at the same place. This person performed as expected, this person. And then they aggregate that at the school level. It's just a giant compute challenge.
So getting over and switching gears for a moment, because now we have all these great tools. Dashboard came out. If you were like us, you probably wear two hats, right? One is the very technical component where you get to geek out and talk to immediate colleagues, sometimes CalPADS people, about what you're seeing. And the other hat is equally as important, is communicating this information, not just to internal leadership, but site level leadership, your governing groups, and your parents. And so we have a few slides here that we wanted to share with you. And if you haven't already seen the dashboard toolkit, I'd highly suggest to block out 30 minutes of your time and jump on there, as those are going to be some great resources. Starting off with just the resource page, which is like the landing page. It's going to have technical information. It's going to give you the measures. It's going to have state indicators on there. And it's basically your first stop and a great resource to share with like your principal site level leadership to bookmark. So if it's not bookmarked on your computer, go ahead and bookmark that. Additionally, was the toolkit that came out, which has been ever growing and so robust. We used it yesterday when we were talking with principals. In that toolkit, not only are you going to have flyers for your academic indicators, flyers for your parents, but there are about 8 or 9 different on-demand videos, note-taking guides that correspond with it that allow you to personalize however you'd like to build capacity with site level leadership or in principal meetings, to kind of give them not just some talking points, but some ways to support building their capacity and their understanding when then they leave, like I said, to go talk to like their other governing groups. Additionally, there's been all the updated dashboard indicator flyers. As you can see on the very bottom, science has been added. And these are great in that They're 1 to 2 pagers. So they're very approachable. They're very tangible. They work well to post on websites or to blow up and to use if they're a speaking point or a teaching tool. So those have all been updated to reflect everything that's changed with State Board. And then flyers for parents. Whatever language your parents may speak, there are over like 45 different translations. But if you're like us and you have to then talk to parents, sometimes they do not need all of the technical components. And our job is to curate that information so they get what's most important and they feel like they can connect not just with their student and what they're doing, but their school and have a voice at the table. These 1 to 2 pagers right here are a great get to know you and help parents along their dashboard journey. So go ahead and give those a look or a glance if you haven't seen that. And probably most important to this group right here and those online are going to be the technical resources. And so the tech guide is out. Whether or not you like to, I like to download them all, stack them, put them into an Adobe booklet for easy reference. Whatever you'd like, they've been updated, all the calculations, computations, business rules associated with each indicator. You can find them there, and they've been updated. And the dashboard additional reports, a handy tool, not just for learning, but for explaining different ideas or even making your goals. As Evan mentioned earlier, with the 5x5s, it was a very exciting activity that we used, 5x5s, and kind of taught what is your current performance? Where have you come? What would it take to move over to increased? Or what would it take to move to another color? Although very technical, makes your goals manageable and a little bit more realistic as opposed to everyone just improving in general. And lastly, don't hassle with it. Let us join the accountability afternoons that are going on. We will get the information. We'll bring it to you either in our DAAN meetings. We put them in our DAAN flash or our updates. If there's a question that you might have, if you haven't sent it to Evan or to myself, we will elevate that as well if there's a need to, and we'll bring them back to you. I got one laugh out of that. That's great. That makes my day. I got a few more. Okay. New data quest reports, Evan. Talk to us about them.
Well, I just feel like the Hoff. Come on, the Hoff in a sweater by a fireplace. Doesn't that just elicit like warm, fuzzy feelings? So yeah, it wasn't just the dashboard that came out. They're actually award time. This is always, and by the way, I'm just going to note, this year we had a slight reprieve in terms of CASP comes out, and then you get a little month before the dashboard comes out. Next year, everything's going to drop on October 15th, right? And so in addition to the dashboard and CASP, I know I see my data people in the head having tremors, thinking about what this is going to mean. It's a lot to happen all at once. So you also get all these data quest reports, which are really supplements to the dashboard reports. And in some ways, they are more useful, depending on, because you can disaggregate them in different ways in the dashboard. You can look at grade spans, for example. You can look at different types of student groups. DataQuest has some unique properties. You could look at, for instance, you can look at English learners who are also students with disabilities, right? It gives you that intersection, which you can't get in any other way unless you're looking at your personal data. So if you're trying to get quick access, so the DataQuest reports that drop on the same day as the dashboard include, excuse me, the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate and the outcomes report, which includes your A through G completion, state seal. It shows all your non-graduates, not dropouts, but non-grads, those who transferred into adult school. It shows all their outcomes as well. Then you've got the 5-year cohort graduation rate and outcome that's slightly different from what you see on the dashboard. 5-year outcome is actually extending the 4-year outcome for a whole additional year and seeing how they pick up. So it's a slightly different number. Then you've got your suspension data and your chronic absenteeism reports that are, again, you can see more there because chronic absenteeism, the dashboard is only a TK through 8. This goes 9 through 12 as well. Plus you can break it down by different grade spans, makes it really handy. Then you've got a bunch of additional reports that were released that aren't necessarily related to the dashboard, but may give you some good perspective. The stability report is an important one that I think we noticed a couple of years ago. It was the foundation for the equity schools determination that they got some additional funding, had to be called out in the LCAP, but the stability report will give you a sense of those students who are basically in and out of your school. And if you have a school with a low stability rate, it may be contributing to some of the challenges you face there. We really like the absenteeism by reason report. It gives you a sense of, was it an excused absence, a non-excused absence? So that can be another great insight tool. And the expulsion data reports, and then our homeless student enrollment by dwelling type. So all those are also posted this last week. And then what's coming forward, I mentioned the growth data also forthcoming in December, particular of interest for school level folks will be this ESSA assistance file, which will have the determinations for exiting from CSI, ATSI, and any schools that were eligible for TSI identification. We're in that in-between year, right? This is a 3-year cycle. This is the next to last year. Next year's dashboard will once again identify CSI and ATSI, but it's a 1-year TSI identification now. And you could actually start to figure this out yourself. If you dug in, you can look at the criteria for eligibility. They will be posting a new, Hillary mentioned the technical guide is up. The one element that's not there yet is the ESSA technical guide has not been posted yet, but you could go in and see both, and I think I have it on the next slide, the eligibility criteria for TSI. So basically, TSI is a 2-year, it's a 2-year determination. So a school would have to meet the criteria for a student group in 2 consecutive years to be identified for TSI. And any school that's not CSI would be eligible. Like if you exited, if you're ATSI and you meet the criteria, that just means you're still ATSI. But if you're CSI or you're general assistance, you have no identification, you would be eligible. They would run these calculations to determine, and these should be familiar by now. They've been the same ones we've used for the last 3 years, but they look at the individual indicators, not the grouped indicators like DA, and they look at if you have all red indicators but one. So you could have 2 indicators and you could have one blue and 1 red, and you would be eligible for a student group, and then 5 or more indicators where the majority are red. So it's the same criteria they've been applying. So you could take a look at you could use your dashboard 1-pager for all your schools and determine, do any of these fit that criteria? That's a really handy use of that tool. And if you have questions, feel free to email me. I actually have one district that I said I'd look at their CSI to see if they are likely to exit. Exiting CSI, ATSI, I'm going out on a limb here because the dashboard technical guide really will get explicit about it, and I didn't include everything here. But just if you're curious, in general, CSI, if you're a low graduation rate, what you have to do is your 3-year graduation rate average has to exceed 68%. 68% and above, and you're out. For the CSI low performing and ATSI, which are similar, CSI is the all students level, ATSI is any student group. Essentially, you first criteria is you don't meet the criteria, right? So you don't meet the criteria for eligibility. And then the second criteria is that at least one of the indicators that was red has to show a nominal improvement. It's like 0.1% or 0.1 distance from standard increase. That's all you have to show. And the reason that those kind of weird rules exist is they don't want somebody to exit just because a student group was so small that they didn't get the same number of indicators, right? That does happen. So you have to both not meet the criteria and then also have an improvement in at least one of those red areas. So the dashboard technical guide for that should be available in the next couple of weeks. So the big thing of the state board is kind of an interesting thing, probably more for county offices than it is for individual districts or schools, but there's a conversation per Assembly Bill 121, which we talked about before. The state board must update the DA performance criteria by July 15th of next year. Right? And so this is based on evaluation that was done by WestEd, and they need to find they need to be better able to target resources where the needs are greatest. So the state board did an extensive study session at the last meeting. They reviewed the differentiated assistance system and statewide system of support. They had 4 presenters. They examined the current performance criteria, and that's kind of what they want to get to first. Big takeaway is they feel that too many districts are being identified. Probably not as many charter schools, but districts are a little more subject to being identified with those student groups popping in and out. The whack-a-mole, they have that image of the whack-a-mole game really came up a couple times. So they're really looking at the current performance criteria, what works, what doesn't work, potential improvements. And they had a presenter, a researcher present a couple examples from other states, what other states do for identification for support. And they looked at significantly smaller states than ours, including Massachusetts, which is still a pretty big state, but compared to California, very different. But they looked at all these. Additionally, they identified some key trends. First, they noted, like we can see on our chart, that there's a big spike post-COVID. We all recognize that, but that big spike strained the capacity. Really, it's like the whole idea of differentiated assistance is like an MTSS model, right? And it's like tier 1 for vast majority, and then a tier 2 intervention for a significantly smaller portion. But when 75% of your districts are eligible for differentiated assistance, how differentiated can it be, right? So some of that was largely just the circumstances, but they do want to continue looking and see, are there changes that can be made to make that more reasonable? And they did talk about that whack-a-mole student group cycling in and out, right? That's kind of hard. It happens. They did make some adjustments based on SB 114 that also was the legislation which brought about this review process. So now there's a 2-year support cycle for districts that are identified. So if you're identified for DA, even if you only meet the eligibility in 1 year, you're still eligible for the support because it takes longer to really do that support. They identified geographic leads to support DA for any LEAs that have struggle with the same repeated student groups, so maybe escalating it. And then they identified the CalPADS-based differentiated assistance in the last year. And we actually have 2 districts in LA County who are eligible for that this year. And that's a 1-year support. So we'll be supporting them, as will CSIS, providing support around CalPADS. And that also, probably contributed somewhat to the increased numbers. So Winstead did present as well. They'd done this research a couple of years ago. They did notice DA does improve student outcomes, but it's not consistent. The implementation of DA varies widely. We are very proud of the work we do at LA County, and if you've worked with us through the DA process, I think you'll find that we have a lot of resources. We're very big. We have a lot of resources, but we really want to focus on individualizing the support for you. So we think we've done a good job. And when you looked at our chart, I think you see consistent decline, which we interpret to be the supports are working, and we see changes happening. But as they do note, when you have that many eligible districts, the support is spread pretty thin. And so there's an effort, can we focus on, is there a way to identify the districts that really need and the charter schools that need the most support so that the support can work? They did note that small student group sizes limit eligibility, right? There are some small student groups, visibility becomes an issue, and so you don't even necessarily acknowledge or recognize where a student group may be struggling. It's certainly very small districts and schools. And then for our purposes, the county offices, we have a very different population, and we are continuously identified. So maybe the metrics are not really well aligned, because when you have graduation rate is dependent on students who are oftentimes transferring in, transferring out, it makes it very difficult. They noted the timeline, the misalignment of the timeline between ESSA and then the dashboard DA cycles. Like we said, we're about to identify we have a 3-year identification next year, and so that is possibly a challenge. And then especially the challenge around aligning all these different supports, particularly the CIM process, it's looked at as burdensome. So these are all things that came up during the report, but also people reflected that in public comments. And they did suggest in the report exploring a unified identification system, so using the S identification process and the DA process for the support, which I think happens in a lot of cases anyway. But that was their outcome. So any questions about those? Like I said, primarily the emphasis is around our work, but we have some. Got a question in the room. Hold on one sec.
Yeah, really quick question. How do we find the data, the DA eligibility data?
That's actually, there's a data file. It's the LCFF assistance file. So if you type in, Google or go to the CDE webpage, LCFF assistance, and that gives you, there's one for charters and one for districts and county offices. It's an Excel file that they publish. It comes out the day of the dashboard. Yeah. And we'll add a link to our slides. And then I just have a few quick data updates. Speaking of data, I got a support my CalPads people. One thing we did get this year as a slight reprieve with regards to CalPads, they had, in addition to pushing for DA for failing to meet submission deadlines, they wanted another criteria to be added, which would be accuracy of data. So data quality, and a district could be identified for data quality. And there was a real question, like, they were going to implement it in the 25-26 school year, and it's kind of like, if you've ever taught before, you can't make the rules up after the school year has started. So there's a lot of pushback, no surprise, and so they pushed it out another year. So this year, again, the criteria will simply be failing to submit on time, which I think most of our LEAs are really good. The two circumstances that our districts were identified for DA were very kind of unusual. So it's pretty atypical. Usually it's easy to get that in. The determination of what will be accurate data, they're taking feedback from the field. And so anytime there's an opportunity, I'll send out some information, generally to our CalPads people, but would like to get some other information. And this could be data that affects your dashboard. We've seen that before. It could be enrollment data, how that affects your demographics. So it's not clear where they're going to look. Hopefully it's data that has implications or makes it hard. Hopefully it's not too minute, because obviously some things do happen, but anything that would have a major impact or make clarity or transparency difficult would be probably my guess where it will fall. We do have a new submission calendar. I just want to highlight that we're right in that area. We're coming up on the November 21st fall 1 deadline for no errors. So if you're being asked by your CalPads people to look at the reports 1.1 and 1.17, which they have some importance, and I'll get that in just a slide, know that they're trying to get the errors cleared by November 21st. I see my CalPads friends in the room are going, yes, please help us. And then the final certification deadline is December 12th, and that requires both the LEA certification and SELPA certification. There is an amendment window. Sometime then in mid-February, they'll open up mid-December, they'll open up the Fall 2 submission, which may be a little more interest of folks in this room, because that's where your teacher assignment monitoring data comes from. So in terms of the dashboard, TAMO data, that whole process starts during Fall 2, and the accuracy will be key. And then we'll do more around the end of year data as we get closer, because that's really where the whole dashboard comes from. So I provide you with some supports around that. I think I skipped over. There we go. And so I just want to emphasize why Fall 1 is such an important submission. It's the money. It's the money. So this is your LCFF supplemental concentration grant funding comes by. The CalPads people know it. They get it drummed into them, but they can't do it alone. So like I said, when they're asking for your support in reviewing data, and I've done this, I've been the receiving end, I've been given a report. There have been some real nice upgrades to the reporting that makes it a lot easier as a reviewer. They give you prior year comparisons so you can see, does this look normal? And if you see something that doesn't look normal, I mean, when somebody first handed me a CalPads report and they're like, can you verify this? I'm like, verify it against what? So now you have some reports that actually will show you what prior years look like, so you can see if it looks off. And it does really boil down to, here are the supplemental concentration grant funds, which are allotted based on your concentration of English learners, foster youth, and low-income students. A lot of that is direct certified, but some of that has to be manually determined. Then also gets into your Title I and Title III allocations and distribution primarily. So it's important to get that right. And then in terms of the data, where it goes in terms of the demographic data, it appears in your SARC, it appears on your dashboard, it appears in DataQuest, IDEA. So all these places where you want to get that right. And it does happen, that data accuracy. Sometimes you do get some flukes, and you can get the data can be really, really off. So I encourage you to support your CalPads people in this collection. And then finally, we just met with the California College Guidance Initiative. There's a CCGI reminder, and it's coming quickly. I just wanted to bring your attention. There is a requirement to enter the data sharing partnership with CCGI by January 1st, if you haven't already, and this is the case for charters and districts. It's a really amazing tool, and we have a lot of districts that are already engaging in it. And it's a process. You get onboarded, and over time, it takes a while to onboard and get the accuracy right. But once it's actually rolling, it's a huge boon to the students as well as to you. It'll give you data for determining if students are on track. It'll clean up your A through G data. So it's really essential. Everybody's required to do it, but it's an essential tool, I think, to improve the data quality here. And so this is ongoing. It's coming up. There is some a CCGI vendor compatibility. So whatever SIS you use, click that link just to make sure that your SIS is participating. It should make it easier for the upload and the onboarding process. And this is a slightly old link, and I have a link elsewhere. We'll take you to the more recent. But if you recall, we had these folks present last year, and these were all the districts at the time who are already participating. So if you're not on here, you may just ask around and find out, are we participating now? You probably are because of the deadline, but there's some real positive outcomes, positive implications for participating in CCGI. Speaking as a dad who had to fill out the Cal State application last year and manually enter all my daughter's courses, I can highly recommend this because all that will be automated. It's like amazing. And just a couple last things we'll plug before we'll take a break here. We started this yesterday. We were just talking about the navigating data sessions. This is a session that we focus around principal level leadership, but we had some district leaders here. The remainder of these, we did a big first session, but each of these sessions kind of stand alone. I can encourage you. The remainder of the sessions are all virtual. So if you're interested, there are 4 more 90-minute sessions that we have, and we focus on building data culture, looking at the data you have. We provide a lot of tools, and it's really about thinking about how you present data, how you analyze data, how you build a data culture within your school. So that's we really enjoy it, and we had a great group of people here yesterday, very engaged. So that was good. And last thing, I just want to plug the 2026 CISC Symposium. There's still some space. It's in Monterey this year. The first time I went to Monterey, I was a district, as a director of curriculum and instruction, and I got to say, it was like one of drinking from the fire hose. There was like a lot going on there. They always have incredible keynotes. They have incredible workshops. We're doing a presentation, Hillary and my boss, Dina Wilson, we're doing a presentation on grading and grading practices. So, I highly recommend it. So if you have the opportunity, and of course it's beautiful Monterey, maybe that's why the people from the chat were checking their travel budget because they saw this and they said, I really want to go. But I would highly recommend visiting the CISC at least one time. It's great stuff. Any questions, or should we move to a little 5-minute break? Okay. Oh, I'm going to put this up now. I'm going to give it later too. But if you have to leave, then make sure you fill out our feedback form. You can fill it out. And if you're in the room, you're stuck here, we're going to get you again. But if you're online, you're going to drop off, please fill this out at some point before you leave because we do value your feedback. And we'll put it up again. It's also in the agenda. But we will take a 5-minute break now, and we will get right back to you.
All right, let's get back into it. Good morning, everyone from Assessment Department. We are welcome. Well, it's great to see so many familiar faces. We know it's important to have colleagues in your corner. We know from experience as individuals in your position, we rely on you for ideas and insights. We encourage you to take advantage of one of the upcoming assessment professional development events. We'll see you there. We're just off of California Assessment Conference. We saw a lot of our Los Angeles County colleagues there. We saw, we're seeing some of you in the room here. I'm sure some of you in the Zoom also. We see Eric, for example. We saw a lot of our colleagues from some of our charters, YPICs in particular. And Sarah did some incredible partnerships with science, with our former colleague Stephanie Fortunato. I did a presentation based on some past work from DAAN, so work that came out of Saugus Union and Puck schools. Deshaw and Dr. Moja developed a lot of the underlying information for those, and And of course, many of you, I had the chance to interview over the last couple of weeks on your use of not interim, but summative science test, the summative alternate science test during the course of the school year. Thank you for providing the foundational information for what was demonstrated in that session. If I asked you whether or not I could quote you, I quoted many of you. If you said no, I did not quote you, but I want to let you know that the only session I presented at California Assessment Conference that got applause was that one. I don't know why, probably because I told them they could get to lunch early. But that was helpful information, I think, for our friends. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. She's going to talk about LPAC and a few other things, and I'll get back.
Right. Can I have a click? Thank you so much. So LPAC, let's start with some updates about LPAC. The new reclassification data came out, and in August, there were about 36,000 students who had received a level 4. Now, as well, the level 4 is the first door. There are 4 doors in the state of California to reclassification, but if you can't get through the first door, you can't go through any of the others. So achieving a 4 on the summative LPAC is that first door, or 3 on the summative alternative LPAC. 36,000 students crossed through door number 1. To date, as of November 3rd, there are still 10,000 students who have crossed through that first door, but have not crossed through all the way to reclassification. So just want to put out a reminder that it is not a limited term window until the summative LPAC starts up again. You can reclassify a child all throughout the school year. Maybe they weren't demonstrating grade level proficiency back in May, maybe September. Remember, you kind of have a good idea of where they are. It's a good time to relook at those 10,000 students across LA County and think, can they be reclassified? So the state is doing a call to action to remind everyone that it is important to look at our ELs. One of the things when it comes to grade level proficiencies, a lot of school districts are still saying, we must have a 3 or 4 on the CASP in order to reclassify. But not even our EOs can sometimes cross that barrier. So it's important not to hold our English language learners to a standard higher than we're holding our English language or English only students. If you have any questions on that or would like to talk to someone, Anna, raise your hand. If you're here in the room, it's from this unit, and she would be happy to engage in a conversation with you. Keep going on the LPAC train. Initial LPAC, as of last week, there were still almost 2,000 students in the state of California who have not completed their initial LPAC. Does that mean? Go to your TOMS, scroll down to the bottom, it'll tell you exactly how many initial LPAC students you have left to assess. It is essential that all of them get this screening, especially prior to the summative LPAC that's coming up. You do have 30 calendar days before the great finger comes and wags at you, but it is important that this gets done as soon as possible. Keep on trucking. The summative LPAC will kick off again in February. Woo! It is a good reminder that it is required that 100% of our students who are English language learners have completed the summative LPAC. Summative LPAC is not the 95% threshold. And as they said over and over again at the California Assessment Conference, 100% is required for all state testing. Summative LPAC, CASP, CAST, all of them are 100%. However, there's wiggle room in the ELA, math, science realm. There's not wiggle room in the LPAC world. Can you hear me? Coolio. Apologies to those in Zoom land. All right, clicker. Are there any questions besides the fact that you couldn't hear me? Okay, cool, moving on. A moment of celebration. This is the highest amount of seal of biliteracies that have been awarded in the state of California since the program began. So bravo, round of applause to all of you who did all of this hard work to make sure the seals of biliteracy were given to the correct students. They were really proud, over 75,000. Yes, applause. Thank you, Hillary. If you want to participate in the Seal of Biliteracy, there is some information here for you. There's a great website. We linked it on the top that gives you all the information. However, there are many paths to Seal of Biliteracy. So just want to put out a reminder, make really good friends with your CalPads person and like bring them some cookies, because they do need to do an extra step in order for that Seal of Biliteracy to be entered into the CalPads system. Did I cover that correctly, Evan? Awesome. The results for the California Spanish assessment will come out in early mid-December. So those results are coming out. So those seals of biliteracy will be retroactive if for students who are using that. Okay, help needed. The state of California is looking to create a screener for our TK students, because right now we don't really have something that we can lean on for that. So they're asking if you know of a vendor, if you're using a screener that you really like, that you think would be very beneficial. So we've given you the information. There's an email at the bottom. They're asking you to spread the word far and wide, because they really want to get something that is useful. And who best to know what's useful than the people who are actually using it? All right, off to you, Stephen. We're going to play a little mic pass. I'll turn it off before I hurt everyone's ears.
How's that? Our CDE presented at the most recent Regional Assessment Network meeting on what do the scores mean, an overview of 24-25 CASP and LPAC summative assessment results. These go into a little bit more detail than you see in the analysis, the press release analysis that accompanied the statewide data release. So we'll walk through these, the notes that they made on those results, a few of the implications as well for the context of it. Let's go into some of that context first, though. In July of 2024, last year, there was a report published by Smarter Balance that was requested by California and other member states for Smarter Balance on a reevaluation of what the scores mean. So as we discussed, and we talked about this in DAAN last year, there were misunderstandings about what's tested, what it communicates about student testing, the more extensive nature of California testing or Smarter Balance testing than some other states. There are some misinterpretations of the test results that were published in major magazines, suggesting that level 2 is not grade level, and so they reiterated some of this information as a few changes are being made. So in terms of those changes, what do those look like on our student score reports upcoming for 25-26? And we've talked about this before in DAAN. You've got the level 4 changing from standard exceeded to advanced. So that standard word is coming out of all the assessment results. Standard met becomes proficient. Level 3, that word proficient exists and continues to be level 3. Proficient is not the level 2 level. Level 2 is developing from standard nearly met, and standard not met is minimal. If we're looking at what that might look like on the student score report next year, they're intended to remove that dotted line between does not meet standard and meets standard. Those words, of course, will change and become those new descriptors. That dotted line is being removed to emphasize the fact that that proficiency level, still level 3, is not that standard level in the prior years, that dividing line is not that level that they're looking at necessarily anymore. It's intended to reinforce that difference. In terms of those changes, a little bit more detail, you see those performance level descriptors are changing for the level 4, 3, 2, 1. In addition to that dotted line disappearing, and you'll see that near standard, the icon is changing to at or near proficient. That's more or less a reversion, and that's going to become an equal sign, a wavy equal sign rather than the plus minus. In terms of what those scores mean, there's one page. It's a good one page that effectively describes what's happening here in terms of levels, and we'll go into detail on one of the images. That image on the right-hand side in the next slide. So looking at that, we see that there's a grouping of level 432 in the data that we saw them present. You'll see those 432 levels in green, darker shades of green as you get to level 4. That misconception is directly addressed, that misconception that 3 or 4 level is grade level. However, those who achieve levels 2 through 4 show increasing consistency with a grade level standards at increasing levels of complexity. And all of those are associated with building skills for career in college. The students who are at level 1 may get some grade level questions correct, but aren't consistently demonstrating grade level knowledge and skills. So all of those 3 levels, 2, 3, and 4, are included in grade level performance, increasing in complexity. In terms of student achievement and a little bit more detail on student achievement over the last year than was named in the press release. The big picture, of course, is meaningful gains in English language arts, math, and science statewide, 1.8 percentage points, about 4 times larger than last year's gains for ELA. Math, 1.8 percentage points increase. That's about twice as large as last year's gains. And science, 2 percentage point increase, about 4 times larger than last year's gains. In total, those proportions of students meeting or exceeding grade level expectations are ELA of 48.8, mathematics of 37.3, and science 32.7%. Excuse me, meeting or exceeding a 3 or 4 proficiency, and that distinction being significant. These results reflect continued progress in academic achievement, of course, and the impact of our collective work across the state. All grades in all subjects saw an increase in the percentage of students scoring at levels 3 and 4, proficient and advanced, as well as higher average scale scores compared to last year. Nearly all student groups, including those defined by race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, English language fluency, and other key demographics, shows improvements across all subjects, underscoring that commitment to providing opportunities to learn. There's further movement to close achievement gaps for key student groups, including Black, African American students, Hispanic Latino students, and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. And these groups showed improvements that were generally larger than the state average in all 3 subjects. However, CDE emphasized that significant gaps still remain, and accelerated growth is needed, particularly for socioeconomically disadvantaged students. Looking at that display, with those greens in all 3 levels, starting with developing, then proficiency level 3. You can see over the past several years, we've seen steady progress in student achievement across tested subjects. Percent of students performing at higher achievement levels, developing, proficient, and advanced has consistently increased, while the proportion scoring at the minimum level has declined. So that yellow image has declined. Upward trend reflects sustained improvement statewide. It underscores the impact of California's long-term investment in the rigorous instruction, educator support, student-centered learning strategies. The gains are significant. Overall scores in ELA math, though, remain below pre-pandemic levels. Science scores were the only subject to return to pre-pandemic levels, surpassing them by 2.8 percentage points. Looking in more detail on the growth at different grade levels, growth trends by grade level, both female and male student groups have mean score increases for 23-24. Male students made a larger than state average improvements in all grades in mathematics and all grades other than grade 8 in ELA. Female students, of course, continue to meet or exceed ELA standards at a higher rate than male students, but both groups did improve, but the 7-point gap in ELA performance does persist. In terms of ELA score trends by race or ethnicity, most student groups made improvements in ELA over last year, except Asian students in grades 3 and 5 and American Indian and Alaska Native in grades 11. But the sample size for that latter group is very small. Black or African American students and Hispanic or Latino students made the same or larger than state average improvements in ELA in all grades. And those groups showed the largest gains. You can see some of those numbers in the 9s, 7s, 6s. Asian student group made the least improvement among all student groups. Other student groups, you can see that students with armed forces family members made larger than state average improvements in all grades in ELA. Foster youth student group and students with disabilities made larger than state average improvements for most grades in ELA. ES students with migrant education status, homeless students, and socioeconomically disadvantaged student groups made less than state average improvements in most grades in ELA. Shifting to math, not shown, male students continue to outperform female students in mathematics with a gap that slightly widened this year. And then looking at groups on this chart, Black or African American student group and Hispanic or Latino student group made larger than state average improvements in most grades. Asian, white, and 2 or more races student groups made lower than state average improvements. Asian student group also had a lower performance in 2024 for grade 3 and grade 5. In terms of other student groups, grade 3 through 8 students with armed forces family members made larger than state average improvements in mathematics. Foster student group made larger improvements than state average improvements in grades 3 through 5 for mathematics, and socioeconomically disadvantaged demonstrated positive momentum, posting an overall gain of 1.2 percentage points. CAST, moving on to science. Looking at gender here, both female and male student groups have mean score increase for 23-24. Male students exceeding the state average improvements in grades 5 and 8. Female students exceeded the state average improvements in high school. For race or ethnicity, most student groups made improvements in CAST over last year, except Asian and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander students in grades 5. Black or African American students and Hispanic or Latino students made larger than state average improvements. Asian student group made the least improvements among all student groups. Overall, Black, African American, and Hispanic Latino plus 2.1 and plus 2.3 students showed strong growth, outpacing the state average gain of 2.0 points. And this growth for CAST for the science test is notable as those scores were the only ones to surpass pre-pandemic 2019 levels. For other student group, mean scale scores for all student groups increased from last year. Students with armed forces family members had larger than state average improvements in all grades. Foster youth student group made larger than state average improvements in grades 5 and 8. And English learners made lower than state average improvements for all grades. All right, so looking at the California alternate assessments for ELA, mathematics, and science, all 3 graphs shown here. Percentage of students reaching level 3 decreased by 1.5 percentage points in ELA and 0.8 percentage points in math, and increased by 0.3 percentage points in science. And that's compared to the 23-24 test administration There's a small fluctuation, about 1 point scale score in the mean scale scores in all grades for all 3 subjects. Looking at the summative LPAC, for English learners, the distribution of performance levels on summative LPAC remained relatively stable from last year to this year, with only minor changes in the percentages of students at each proficiency level. Again, this LPAC, the LPAC is our English language proficiency assessments for California, and that consistently reflects ongoing support for English learners, even as the population of new English learners continues to grow. Moving on to the summative alternate LPAC. This slide shows distribution of proficiency levels for that summative alternate LPAC, with 19.3% of students achieving criteria 1 for reclassification. As Sarah mentioned earlier, be sure to review your criteria 2, 3, and 4 for reclassification for all students who achieved a level 4 in LPAC or a level 3 on the alternate LPAC, and reclassify ideally before the opening of the summative LPAC assessment window on February 1st. There are a variety of reports and systems that are designed to meet the needs of your students, your parents, your educators. We have listed here a few of those resources. Student score reports, student test results are available in systems that are available to you and your educators. CERS, California Educator Reporting System, is essential that you are rostering your teachers at this time or earlier in the season so that your teachers have access to detailed individual and group assessment results, and that they can use those to inform their instruction and support student learning. There are also test results for California Assessment's website that provides public access to this data as well for CASPA and LPAC. All right, moving on to some other updates.
Other update, there's a question in the chat, and the question is, why did they remove the dotted line between SSRs between meeting and meeting? It seems like something really visual that supports parents understanding if their student is meeting or not meeting.
So they continue to have the word proficient. The language, I believe there is a description of why that dotted line is being removed in the State Board of Education's the item that shows this change. You have anything to add?
No, I will pull up the one you're saying it's in the board item itself.
I believe the board item
Okay.
has a description of.
We'll pull that up. We'll add it, and then in the follow up we'll try to specify. That's a great question, and one we're going to grapple with a little bit in our extension activity. So thanks, Marisa. We'll definitely look in more to that. Give you a link with some specific language.
In terms of the RAND presentation by State Board of Education, I believe that was a Chad Portney slide, and his articulation was it was to reinforce that smarter balanced study showing that grades 2, 3, and 4 are grade level on a grade level continuum, increasing in proficiency. All right, looking at score reports, just a few highlights on those score reports. We talked about some changes that are upcoming already. This is a visual of those upcoming student score reports for the end of the year. This testing season, that's a 25-26 testing season for the summative. It's showing the summative assessment score reports for 2026. You can see that dotted line is missing there at that proficiency level on the left. You can see it's also missing in those score history listings. It also includes that proficient level at a level 3 as the descriptor. So this is a updated student score report, what it would look like. Also shows a demonstration of multiple languages for that. And Sarah also talked to this when she was talking to the seal by literacy. So state seal by literacy, one of the multiple means of achieving the proficiency in a language other than English requirement of state seal by literacy is assessment. Among those assessments are AP, IB, and coming soon as the California Spanish Assessment. The original intention for the development of the California Spanish Assessment was to provide a assessment that could be utilized for the state seal by literacy. And now the results can be utilized for state seal by literacy. The upcoming results, those upcoming results that should be dropped in early December. And this is what that student score report will look like in early December. You notice there's 3 levels of proficiency. It's expected that that level 3 is at the high school is going to be that proficient level, qualifying a student for state seal by literacy. You can see those available with the score history if the student is taking it over multiple years. You can see those performance areas split into listening, speaking, reading, writing, and then those overarching oral literacy and written literacy scores. That looks a little bit like LPAC in terms of the way it's broken out. So that high school SSR is going to be, and the data for it is going to be available for use in state seal by literacy coming this December. Of course, you will have had students who were seniors who took that for the first time. It's a little bit delayed in getting those results. Presumably, you could locally provide state sealed by literacy to prior graduates who only qualified for it using the CSA results. Of course, if they took the AP or if they got it by their grades in Spanish or any other language from a course taken, they would have already gotten that. This is just Spanish. And of course, if you have 11th grader, those results would have already been available in prior years. There's also score reports coming for grade 5. This are prior grades. This is the example of the SSR that will be published in December for the grades lower than high school. All right, I'm handing it back to my colleague here. I'm going to turn this off.
All right, can you hear me okay? Awesome. So I'm going to talk about the federal peer review. The way Mao Vang explained it at the CERA conference, I just kept thinking it's FPM for our state tests. So there was a full federal evaluation of all of our state assessments. There was a group of peers from the U.S. Department of Education and experts in education that went through every single level of all of the tests we give to evaluate whether or not they are holding up for accuracy, validity, rigor. Can you hit that slide for me? Because I failed to grab the clicker. Here are all of the 6 areas that our assessments were evaluated based on. I'm not going to go over all of them, but you can see state adoption of academic content standards, check. Coherent and rigorous academic content standards for all students, required assessments, policies. So these are the 6 buckets that you must meet every single one of these in order to be considered a high quality assessment. It was a huge process. I'm going back, giving away the big reveal. It is an iterative process, meaning that they give you some feedback, then you go back and work on it, and then they give you more feedback, and then you go back and work on it. If you've ever been through an FPM, that might sound very, very familiar. Here's how California stands. As of right now, our Smarter Balanced ELA, our math, our CAST, our summative LPAC, and our summative alternative LPAC are all meets requirements. That is the absolute highest value you can have in the country. And we are one of the very, very few states that meets that. Our California alternative assessment for science and our California alternative assessment for ELA and math substantially meets the requirements. So those are still in the iterative process where they're continuing to be evaluated. So we can say with confidence that in the state of California, the assessments we are giving for our students meet not only our standards, but the federal standards for an accurate and valid assessment. So bravo, which Mal wanted me to share with you. Bravo, thank you to all of you because all of you were part of that process. All of you are constantly reviewing, giving feedback, participating in groups. You're doing your data entry. I don't know what I did. Doing your data entry, all of the things necessary to meet all of those FPMs. How many of you been on an FPM before? Yeah, they come out, they ask questions, they interview people, you have to submit documentation. Very similar process for the state. So on behalf of Mal Vang, which I will never ever claim to ever say again, she would like to thank you. All right, questions, thoughts, ideas, freakouts. Are there any thoughts, ideas, questions, or freakouts in the chat? All right, we'll continue to type in the chat. We're going to keep looking at it. Again, we do want your feedback. The only way we can improve and make this better for all of you is if you give us information on what you would like to see. So please, please, please take a moment, fill out that survey. And Stephen, I think we play a little backy-forthy, so I'll just stand next to you.
All right, we don't have Marcus here today, I don't believe.
It's actually.
Oh, he is here.
Yes, I am. Hello and good
I want
morning.
to announce this. Do you recognize this Meet Your Success Agent for Connect for Success slide?
Yes, this is something that is ongoing currently at this time that myself and the other success agent counterparts hold for all of our region networks as well. So we will be having that upcoming Connect for Success, and it just gives the coordinators, whether they be returning coordinators or new coordinators to our assessment systems, just it gives them a chance to interact with their success agents. We're typically all virtual there. We got our cameras on, all that stuff. So it gives them the chance to get a little more interaction with us, and we also go over specific things that are happening in the field or specific pain points with the LEA, everything like that. So it just gives them a chance to interact with us, and we're able to address a couple of topics with them more directly.
Thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, of course.
Pleasure to hear the voice of God in the room.
Oh, thank you.
In our assessment unit, we are hosting a bevy of free Zoom-based professional learnings that we wanted to make sure you're aware of. Today, we're actually doing one called Pin the Tail on the Genre, specifically looking at how we can help our students code switch between the genres when they're doing their writing performance task. We also have our Teacher Institute, where we're talking about how teachers can leverage their formative assessment to make decisions about interims to help improve instruction in classrooms. We have our CAST Academy. If you've got somebody who's never seen the CAST before and they need like super basics, we have a 4-part series that we do in collaboration with people from CASE. I'm not going to say it right, but they're the science people. And Cal State Dominguez Hills. No, Cal State Northridge. Always pick the wrong college. Then we're doing mic drop math. We're going to really zoom in on those math performance tasks. We're going to take a look at different tools. And finally, X marks the spot, finding treasure in the Smarter Balanced Content Explorer. So we're doing lots of resources, all free. Please share them with everybody at your site, TOSAs, teachers, whoever you think might benefit from this. All free. And I'm going to hand it over to Evan to talk about upcoming DAANs.
Well, no, but I just want to remind those of you who are in Zoom land, I don't know. We'll try this one. Okay, so we have some upcoming, we just run it for me, thanks. Upcoming meetings, and I actually didn't put the slide where I probably should have, which was right here, which makes the case for why you should be in the room. There's a, yeah, it's earlier, I skipped over it. Anyway, if you can, make one of our in-person meetings, we really encourage it. We're going to now shut the online meeting off, and we have a little 30-minute real world scenario action around communicating data drawn, ripped from the headlines. And I don't want to say it was controversial, but let's just say it had at least one county up in arms around some of the communication that went out around CAS. But I think we'll find it interesting, and we're going to try to engage around that. You're missing out if you're online. So try to make it to our January meeting on the January 27th. We're a fun group. We have good, I hear repeatedly, we have a really good oatmeal. I never have a chance to eat it, but the oatmeal, I think, is worth the drive. Anyway, we're going to sign off. We thank Marcus Betancourt from ETS for joining us and the rest of our team. We'll send out our follow-up in about a week's time for some of your questions. But thanks for you online. And for those of you who are here, give us 5 minutes to switch over, and we'll start with the extension activity.